So, welcome back to these introductory videos to the book of Revelation. Brief studies that will help us know how to pack for the journey as we go through the book of Revelation together under the theme that Jesus makes all things new. Let me give you a little map through the book so you kind of know where you are. The book of Revelation has a prologue at its very beginning, chapter 1, verses 1 through 20, in which Christ is introduced to us as the one who is central in the church, the head of the church, and the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the one who conquered death and died for us to make us his kings and priests in the world. And it ends with an epilogue where Jesus, our King, is seen with us as his bride, making all things new with new heavens and new earth. Between Jesus' death and resurrection and his second coming, he is working in his church and through his church to bring his kingdom to come. And that means that, like him, we suffer as we obey God, and we are called to maintain faithful witness, that we're called to speak his truth. And that is unfolded for us in the world through, you won't be surprised by this, 7 sevens that you see in the book of Revelation. It starts off with, in chapters 2 and 3, 7 churches that Christ speaks to. And then in chapter 4 through chapter 8, there are 7 seals that are opened or broken. A scroll is opened up. As you know, we close the book of Daniel with Daniel having a scroll and being told to close it up and to seal it and to wait because it's for a later time. Well, that seal that Daniel put away is now taken up and opened in the book of Revelation. And every one of those seals unfold parts of what is being told to us. That follows with a vision of 7 trumpets. And then there are 7 great encounters that John has between chapter 11 and chapter 15. Visions, for instance, of the dragon, and visions of the beast from the sea and the beast on the earth. This is followed by 7 bowls of God's wrath being poured out and 7 visions of the world to come. Sprinkled in, because you would have said, wait a minute, that's only 6 groups of 7s, but there are 7 beatitudes that go through the whole book. You know, a beatitude is a blessing, and so those are phrases that begin, blessed are, or blessed is. And so, for instance, early on in chapter 1, verse 3, it says, blessed is the one who reads this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear the words of this prophecy and do it. Take it to heart and put it into practice. So that group of 7s is what lies between the prologue introducing us to the whole book and the epilogue, which tells us not simply how God takes all of these things and weaves them all together into something remarkable and beautiful, but how history itself is wrapped up and culminates in Jesus and his bride. Now, these 7 sevens that are in the book of Revelation, along with the prologue and the epilogue, are actually set in or framed in 4 particular visions. And you can tell where they are because they're introduced to us by a little phrase, I was in the Spirit. That in the Spirit means that John's been taken into a place of revelation, of seeing. The word revelation, remember, the word we use for apocalypse, doesn't mean something catastrophic or disastrous. It means the curtain's been pulled back. He's seeing something. So he's in the Spirit. So when you see that, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day, for instance, in chapter 1, that's the signal that a visionary experience is taking place. That's the first one. Then in chapter 4, in the Revelation chapter 4, a new section begins with vision. I heard a voice that said, come up here. And immediately I was in the Spirit and before the throne of God. And so that second visionary section goes from Revelation chapter 4 all the way through to chapter 17, verse 2. And then in chapter 17, verse 2 comes a third section where John is called up in the Spirit into the wilderness where he sees the ultimate outcomes of the opponents of the gospel in the world. And then, fourthly, here's the fourth framing of what's going on in the book of Revelation. I was in the Spirit on a mountain. He's taken to a mountain top where he sees the city of God, the heavenly Jerusalem, coming down, the kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven, where all things are made new. So if you remember in the Spirit, those four frameworks, those four big sections of Revelation, it'll help you to understand what you're looking at. So what is it that you're looking at? And that's where sometimes things get a bit baffling. That's because the imagery of these visions is drawn from the Old Testament. And so many people are unfamiliar with the territory of the Old Testament, with its symbols and signs. And so sometimes the sign language of Revelation, the imagery of the book of Revelation, is lost on us. And that's mostly because we just don't know what the rest of the Bible is saying when it comes to those symbols. Let's unpack some of that for a couple of minutes. The imagery that we see in the Old Testament would be very familiar to John and very familiar to the people to whom he's writing. But to us, we don't necessarily get it. But some of it begins right away with the book of Daniel. We've already looked at Daniel chapter 7 about the Son of Man coming with the clouds. That's how the book of Revelation opens. And of course, for some people, they hear the phrase, the Son of Man coming with the clouds, and they think instantaneously, second coming. But you already know that while that involves the return of Christ, it's speaking first about the ascension of Christ coming up to the Ancient of Days and being given the kingdom and authority over the whole world. That's why he says to us in the Great Commission, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples, and so on. So that Son of Man imagery, drawing from Daniel especially, Daniel chapter 7, but also Ezekiel and other places, is really important in the book of Revelation. But that's not the only imagery. Garden imagery is extremely important as well. If you attended our seminar on the end, on eschatological language, you'll remember that the garden creation is one of the pillars of having a great biblical eschatology. That when God made all things, he made it with an end in view. It wasn't just random. So he has a purpose and a plan in everything that he'd made, and he called it all very good. And so the beginning of the Bible and the end of the Bible are tied together. So in the Garden of Eden, we've got the rivers flowing and the leaves of the tree of life and the fruit that comes from it. And when you get to the book of Revelation, the garden hasn't disappeared. The garden has become the garden city. There's a river of life flowing from the throne of grace. The leaves of the tree along that river are for the healing of the nations. What God began with is now something which has grown into something more spectacular and wonderful. Sin, despite its vandalization of ourselves and the whole human race and all of creation, has not ultimately triumphed. God has triumphed in the gift of his Son Jesus, and he is making all things new. In the creation story, we first discover, for instance, beasts. Beasts are made on day 6, and humankind is given dominion over the beasts. And we are made on the same day as them. But as you know, in the Old Testament, when people are in sin, especially people with authority, rulers and kingdoms, when they're in authority and they become arrogant and prideful, then the Bible compares them to beasts. They become beasts. Adam and Eve, when they rebelled against God, and remember, Adam and Eve were the king and queen of the cosmos there in the Garden of Eden. God had put them in charge and put all things under their feet. And then they rebelled against God. They threw their crowns in the dust, and they ended up clothed with animal skins. They were behaving in a beastly way. And so when we come to beasts in the book of Revelation, we're not looking at something new or different. We're looking at political entities, religious entities. We're looking at things with authority and power that are behaving in rebellious ways against God. And when rebellious powers, whether it's nations or peoples or governments, are under God's judgment, especially their governments, the language the prophets use is a collapsing universe. The stars fall from the sky. The sun goes out. The moon is darkened. That's the language of the Old Testament for describing the fall of nations. It doesn't mean the sun literally goes out or the moon disappears, but it does mean that the powers that are running the world, they fall and they give way to God's will ultimately being carried out. There are feasts which are in the Bible, the Feast of Passover, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Pentecost. All of this feasting language and the celebrations which are associated with it and the sacrifices which are associated with it. All those sacrifices in Leviticus that we tend to skip over, well, they actually play a part in the book of Revelation, as we'll come to see. And then it's not only them, it's even figures which show up across the Old Testament like two women in the book of Proverbs. You have wisdom, who is a woman who cries out to the foolish, "Come to the feast that I've prepared for you. Come to me and learn wisdom, learn to be wise." But her voice isn't the only one in the city. There's another woman, a harlot. And this woman is crying out, saying, "Come to the feast I've prepared. Come to the seductive table that I have set." And Proverbs tells us, the fools who go in her house don't know that it ends in death. And we have two women in the book of Revelation. We have the harlot Babylon, and we have the bride of Christ. And so this imagery from the Old Testament is something which is deeply embedded in the book of Revelation. And the more familiar with that Old Testament sign language that we are, the more we'll understand the book of Revelation, the sign language that God uses to communicate to His people what's going on behind the scenes in a world that is set against them. Everywhere they look, they see the symbols of Roman power. They see the symbols of false gods. They see those temples. They don't have churches. You don't see crosses on the tops of buildings at those times. The only crosses an early Christian would see were those erected that had people hanging on them, sometimes their own brothers and sisters. And so when you live in a world which is in direct opposition to you, you need your imagination filled with the scenes of heaven or the world as heaven sees it, so that you have a faithful witness in that world, a patient and enduring faith that cannot be shaken. That's the language of the whole book of Revelation. Let's turn to the next video now.